Imagine reading a massive, epic saga about a superhero, but the superhero never actually shows up. No cape, no dramatic landing, not even a cameo. You'd probably ask, wait, why is this guy's name on the cover? Well, welcome to the greatest hidden Easter egg in all of ancient literature, the Book of Esther. Out of the 66 books in the Bible, a library filled with seas splitting in half, fire raining from the sky, and angels delivering midnight warnings, there is exactly one book where the word God is completely missing. 0 mentions. No Yahweh, no Lord, no divine voice booming from the heavens, no supernatural miracles, no prophets. Just a seemingly ordinary string of political scandals, high-stakes beauty pageants, assassination plots, and royal temper tantrums. So, what on earth is a story without God doing right in the middle of the Bible? To understand this brilliant literary paradox, we have to rewind the clock to the 5th century BC, dropping right into the heart of the most formidable superpower the ancient world had ever seen, the Persian Empire. We aren't talking about a tiny, regional kingdom here. The Persian Empire was a sprawling behemoth that stretched all the way from India to Ethiopia. It was massive, ridiculously wealthy, and highly organised. Sitting at the absolute top of this geopolitical food chain was King Xerxes, or as the Hebrew text calls him, Ahasuerus. If you've seen the movie 300, you might picture Xerxes as a towering, golden-clad tyrant, demanding absolute submission. The historical and biblical reality isn't far off in terms of his massive ego. Xerxes was essentially the ultimate Nepo baby of the ancient world. He inherited a colossal empire, endless riches, and absolute authority from his predecessors. But here is the psychological key to his character that drives this entire plot. Despite having the power of a living god, Xerxes was wildly insecure, highly impulsive, and incredibly easy to manipulate. He was the kind of ruler who made catastrophic, empire-altering decisions when he was drunk, only to vaguely regret them when he sobered up. Life in his capital city of Susa was like an ancient high-stakes episode of Game of Thrones mixed with The Crown. It was a world drenched in luxury, but ruled by paranoia, where one wrong word, one misstep, could literally cost you your head. And right in the middle of this glittering, dangerous playground, a story is about to unfold. It reads like a tense geopolitical thriller. It's a story about a marginalised ethnic minority teetering on the edge of total genocide, a cruel villain with a dangerously fragile ego, a stubborn old man who refuses to bow, and an orphaned refugee girl who is about to play the most dangerous game of psychological poker in human history. God's name might be entirely erased from this script. But as we are about to see, when the curtain rises on the Persian court, the invisible director has already been meticulously setting the stage. And the inciting incident, it all starts with the most disastrous royal dinner party of all time. Our story kicks off in the 3rd year of King Xerxes' reign. To show off his unimaginable wealth and military might, the king throws a massive, opulent festival for his nobles and officials. We are not talking about a weekend getaway. This was a spectacular 180-day flex of pure imperial ego. Marble pillars, gold and silver couches, mosaic pavements of mother of pearl, and rivers of royal wine flowing without limits. When that 6-month marathon finally ends, Xerxes tops it off with a 7-day bender for the general public in Susa. By day 7, the king is, to put it mildly, deeply intoxicated. In a drunken haze, he decides to show off his ultimate trophy, his stunningly beautiful wife, Queen Vashti. He commands his eunuchs to bring her out, wearing her royal crown, to parade her beauty before his drunk, rowdy friends. And then, the unthinkable happens. Queen Vashti says, no. In the patriarchal, authoritarian world of ancient Persia, a woman, Even a queen, publicly denying the absolute monarch, was practically a death wish. The text doesn't explicitly tell us why she refused. Maybe she was protecting her dignity. Maybe she knew the environment was toxic. Regardless of her reasons, her single syllable of defiance drops like a nuclear bomb in the palace. Xerxes is humiliated. His fragile ego is shattered in front of his entire cabinet. Furious and not thinking straight, he turns to his wise men for legal advice on how to handle his wife. What follows is one of the most unintentionally hilarious moments of political panic in recorded history. His lead advisor, Memucan, steps up and essentially says, "Your Majesty, this isn't just a PR disaster for you. If word gets out that the Queen defied the King, women everywhere will stop listening to their husbands. We'll have a nationwide epidemic of disrespectful wives. Total anarchy." Their solution to this imaginary domestic apocalypse? Cancel Vashti. They issue an irreversible, empire-wide royal decree stripping Vashti of her crown, officially banishing her, and hilariously mandating by law that every man should be the ruler over his own household. But fast forward a little while and the dust settles. Xerxes sobers up. The anger fades and the loneliness creeps in. He misses Vashti. However, because of the rigid Persian legal system, a decree sealed with the king's signet ring can never be revoked, not even by the king himself. He's trapped in the consequences of his own impulsive tantrum. Seeing the king depressed, his attendants pitch a shiny new distraction. "Let's hold a nationwide search. We will bring all the most beautiful young virgins from every province to the royal harem in Susa. The one who pleases the king the most will be the new queen." It was essentially the ancient world's first and most ruthless reality TV dating show. But make no mistake, this wasn't a glamorous pageant you auditioned for. It was a royal draft. Young women were taken from their homes, whether they wanted to go or not, and placed under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch. This power vacuum is exactly where the camera pans away from the glittering Persian elites and zooms in on the underdogs of our story. Living in the capital city are two Jewish exiles. First, there is Mordecai, a minor palace official, who spends his days near the king's gate. And then there is his much younger cousin, whom he adopted as his own daughter after her parents died. Her Hebrew name is Hadassah, but in the Persian world, she goes by a different name, Esther. Esther is swept up in the king's brutal beauty draft and taken into the royal harem. But before she disappears behind the heavy palace doors, Mordecai gives her one strict, terrifyingly serious piece of advice. Do not tell anyone who your people are. Do not reveal that you are Jewish. For an orphaned immigrant girl, the royal harem was an incredibly isolating place. The preparation process alone took a staggering 12 months. 6 months of beauty treatments with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. It was a factory designed to strip away your individuality and mould you into a perfect object for the king's fleeting pleasure. Yet there is something magnetic about Esther. She doesn't demand extra jewellery or special treatment. She takes the advice of Hegai, the eunuch who knows the king's taste better than anyone. She possesses a quiet, profound grace that captivates everyone who looks at her. When her turn finally comes to go before King Xerxes, the king is completely mesmerised. He doesn't just like her. The text says he loved her more than all the other women. He places the royal crown on her head, officially making the orphaned Jewish refugee the queen of the mighty Persian Empire. It looks like a fairy tale ending. Esther has secured the bag, reached the pinnacle of ancient society, and survived the draft. But underneath the heavy gold crown and the royal robes, she is carrying a dangerous secret. She is living a double life in a palace where secrets are usually paid for with blood. And while she sits safely in the royal quarters, a dark, catastrophic storm is brewing just outside the palace doors. Before we meet our villain, the story casually drops a seemingly random administrative detail that will later become one of the greatest plot devices in literary history. Shortly after Esther becomes queen, Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate when he overhears two royal guards, Bigthana and Teresh, plotting to assassinate King Xerxes. Mordecai immediately leaks the intel to Queen Esther, who reports it to the king, giving full credit to Mordecai. The plot is foiled, the traitors are impaled, and the event is meticulously recorded in the royal chronicles. But here is the kicker. Mordecai gets absolutely nothing. No promotion, no gold, no royal thank you. His heroic deed is simply buried in the imperial archives and forgotten. Put a pin in that, because it is the invisible director planting a ticking time bomb. Instead of promoting the guy who literally saved his life, Xerxes inexplicably promotes a completely different man to be his second in command. Haman. The text introduces him as Haman the Agagite. If you know your ancient biblical history, massive alarm bells are ringing right now. Centuries earlier, the Israelites, led by King Saul, who happens to be Mordecai's direct ancestor, fought a bitter war against the Amalekites, led by King Agag, Haman's ancestor. This isn't just a standard political rivalry, this is a generational, blood-soaked ancient feud. It's the Montagues and the Capulets, but with empires and ancient grudges. Along with his promotion, Xerxes issues a strict royal command. Whenever the new prime minister walks by, every official at the king's gate must kneel and pay him honour. And everyone does. The Persian court is terrified of the king's wrath, so they drop to the pavement whenever Haman struts past. Everyone, that is, except Mordecai. Day after day, Haman parades through the gate and Mordecai just stands there. He refuses to bow. The other palace workers are panicked. They badger him daily, asking, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" Mordecai simply tells them that he is a Jew. He will not bow to a mortal man with a god complex, and he certainly isn't going to kneel before the ancient enemy of his people. When the officials finally snitch and point this out to Haman, the villain is filled with a blinding, toxic rage. Haman is a man whose ego is so massive, yet so incredibly fragile, that the sight of one old man standing up completely ruins his day. But Haman decides that simply assassinating Mordecai is beneath him. His wounded pride demands a monumental, terrifying revenge. He doesn't just want to kill Mordecai, he wants to wipe out Mordecai's entire race. He decides to annihilate every single Jew living within the borders of the vast Persian Empire. To determine the optimal date for this genocide, Haman leans into ancient superstition. He brings in diviners to cast lots, which in the ancient Akkadian language is called pur, trusting the unseen forces of fate to pick the perfect day for a massacre. The dice roll, and the date is set for the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Now Haman just has to get the king's approval. He approaches Xerxes and delivers a masterclass in political manipulation, expertly playing on the king's chronic paranoia and his greed. Haman doesn't even name the Jews. He keeps it vague. "Your Majesty, there is a certain unnamed demographic scattered across your empire. They keep to themselves. They have their own weird customs and worse. They don't obey the king's laws. It's dangerous to tolerate them. Give the word to destroy them, and I will personally weigh out 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury to cover the costs." Xerxes, being lazy, paranoid, and tragically impulsive, doesn't ask a single follow-up question. He doesn't ask who these people are or ask for any proof of their treason. He just takes his royal signet ring off his finger and casually tosses it to Haman. "Keep the money," the king says, "and do with the people as you please." Just like that, with a flick of the wrist and zero fact-checking, a state-sponsored genocide is legally sealed. Fast riders sprint out to all 127 provinces carrying the horrifying edict. On one specific day, citizens are legally ordered to destroy, kill, and annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, and to legally plunder all their property. The scene ends on a masterfully chilling, cinematic contrast. As the horrific decree is posted on the city walls, the capital of Susa is thrown into absolute chaos and bewilderment. But up in the palace, the king and Haman calmly sit down to have a drink. When the news of Haman's genocide decree hits the streets, a shockwave of absolute terror and grief rips through the Jewish communities across the Persian Empire. The text tells us there was great mourning, fasting, weeping, and wailing. Mordecai, the man whose stubborn defiance inadvertently sparked Haman's apocalyptic rage, is entirely broken. He tears his clothes, puts on rough sackcloth, covers his head in ashes, and walks right into the centre of the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. Meanwhile, inside the insulated, gold-plated bubble of the royal harem, Queen Esther is completely in the dark. She hasn't seen the decree. The cries of the city are muffled by the thick palace walls. When her maids inform her that Mordecai is pacing outside the king's gate in sackcloth, she is deeply distressed. But her initial reaction is very telling. She secretly sends out fresh clothes so he can take off the sackcloth and enter the gate. She's trying to fix the aesthetic of the problem, blissfully unaware of the lethal reality behind it. Mordecai naturally refuses the clothes. Realizing something is terribly wrong, Esther dispatches one of her most trusted eunuchs, Hathach, to go outside and find out what is happening. Mordecai doesn't just give Hathach a vague summary. He brings the receipts. He tells the eunuch the exact amount of silver Haman promised to pay the royal treasury to fund the genocide, and he hands over a written, legally binding copy of the royal decree to show the queen. Then, Mordecai drops the ultimate terrifying command: go into the king's presence, beg for mercy, and plead for the lives of your people. Esther's response back to Mordecai is grounded in pure, rational terror. She reminds him of a famous, brutal Persian law that everyone from the highest nobles to the lowest peasants knows by heart. If any man or woman approaches the inner court of the king without being explicitly summoned, there is only one penalty: immediate death. The king's bodyguards are trained to strike you down on the spot. The only exception, the only loophole in this deadly legislation, is if the king happens to be in a good mood and extends his solid gold scepter to spare your life. And then Esther adds the terrifying detail that makes this a virtual suicide mission. I have not been summoned to come to the king for 30 days. Xerxes has been ignoring her. He is notoriously volatile, and given his history of aggressively disposing of queens who annoy him, remember Vashti? Walking in uninvited is essentially signing her own death warrant. Hathach relays this hesitation back to Mordecai, setting the stage for the most famous, electrifying piece of dialogue in the entire book. Mordecai sends back a message that violently shatters Esther's palace illusion. He says, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish." And then he delivers the legendary line, a line echoing with the weight of an invisible, divine providence. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? This is the psychological turning point of the entire narrative. Mordecai is telling her, the universe has orchestrated your entire tragic, complex life. The loss of your parents, the terrifying beauty draft, the immense favour of the king, just for this exact moment. You aren't a victim of circumstance, you are a weapon of deliverance. But you have a choice. Will you step up into your destiny, or will you hide behind your crown? The Esther who replies to Mordecai is no longer a frightened, compliant refugee trying to survive. She steps fully and fearlessly into her royal authority. She sends her final, resolute answer. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And she ends with a fiercely brave statement of absolute surrender to her fate. And if I perish, I perish. The countdown begins. a 72-hour fast. No military backup, no weapons, no political leverage. Just a young woman preparing to dress in her royal robes and walk straight into the lion's den, betting her life on the incredibly slim hope that a volatile, unpredictable king might just lower a golden scepter. On the third day, the fasting ends. The tension is suffocating. Esther puts on her most magnificent royal robes. She leaves the safety of the harem, walks down the long, echoing corridors, and steps into the inner court, standing directly in the king's line of sight. Picture the scene. The heavily armed royal guards instantly grip their weapons, ready to strike down the intruder. The court goes dead silent. King Xerxes, sitting high on his throne, looks up. The absolute power over life and death rests entirely in his notoriously unpredictable mood. The seconds stretch into eternity. And then? The king smiles. He extends the solid gold scepter. Esther walks forward, her heart pounding, and touches the tip of it. She survives. Xerxes, clearly charmed, asks, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." Now logic dictates that Esther should immediately drop to her knees and scream, "My husband, your new prime minister is trying to murder me and all my people. Please stop him." But Esther is playing a much longer, infinitely more dangerous game of psychological chess. She knows Xerxes is easily manipulated by Haman, and she needs to corner the villain perfectly. So she calmly replies, "If it pleases the king, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." Xerxes loves a party, so he agrees. Haman is hurriedly summoned. At the banquet, the king, a few drinks in, asks again, "Seriously, Esther, what do you want? Name it." Once again, Esther holds her cards close to her chest. She hooks them further. "My petition is this. If I have found favour with the king, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to another banquet I will prepare, and then I will answer the king's question." Haman leaves the palace that afternoon, floating on a cloud of toxic euphoria. He is the only official invited to a private dinner with the king and queen. His ego has inflated to the size of a hot air balloon. He walks out of the royal gates feeling invincible. But then the balloon pops. As he struts through the king's gate, there is Mordecai. Not only is Mordecai not bowing, but he also isn't even trembling. He refuses to acknowledge Haman's existence. Haman's blinding rage instantly returns, completely ruining his glorious mood. He goes home and gathers his wife, Zeresh, and his friends. He throws an epic pity party, literally bragging about his massive wealth, his many sons, and how the king has elevated him above everyone else. "And get this," he boasts, "I'm the only one Queen Esther invited to dine with her and the king, but..." He sighs heavily. "None of this means anything to me as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife and friends offer a terrifyingly brutal, over-the-top solution. Don't wait for the genocide date. Build a massive wooden pole, 75 feet tall, about 22 meters. First thing in the morning, go to the king, ask for permission to impale Mordecai on it, and then go enjoy your fancy dinner with the queen. Haman loves the idea. The massive gallows are constructed that very night, looming darkly over the city. Meanwhile, back in the palace, the invisible director of our story makes his most brilliant, hilarious move. It's an impossibly perfect, perfectly timed coincidence. That exact same night, King Xerxes cannot sleep. Tossing and turning, he makes a spectacularly boring request. Instead of asking for warm milk or soft music, he orders his servants to bring in the Royal Chronicles, the ancient equivalent of reading the congressional record, and read them aloud to help him doze off. The servant randomly opens the heavy scrolls and begins reading, and of all the thousands of days in Xerxes' reign, the servant just happens to read the exact entry from years ago, recording how Mordecai the Jew uncovered a plot by 2 royal guards and saved the king's life. Xerxes suddenly sits up. Wait, what honour and recognition was given to Mordecai for doing this? The attendants checked the records. Nothing, Your Majesty. Nothing has been done for him. Xerxes, realizing he has a massive unpaid debt of honour, demands action. Just at that moment, the sun is rising, and heavy footsteps echo in the outer court. It is Haman, arriving incredibly early, to eagerly ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on his brand new 75-foot gallows. "Who is in the court?" the king asks. Told it is Haman, the king orders him in. Before Haman can even open his mouth to ask for Mordecai's execution, Xerxes hits him with a vague, loaded question. "Haman, what should be done for the man the king delights to honour?" This is the pinnacle of the book's dark, biting satire. Haman, blinded by his own astronomical narcissism, thinks to himself, "Who would the king delight to honour more than me? Obviously he's talking about me." So Haman paints the most extravagant, ego-stroking fantasy imaginable. For the man the king delights to honour, have them bring a royal robe the king himself has worn, and a horse the king himself has ridden, one with a royal crest on its head. Let one of the king's most noble princes robe the man, lead him on the horse through the city streets, and shout ahead of him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honour." Xerxes nods approvingly. Brilliant idea. Go at once. And then he drops the hammer. Get the robe and the horse and do exactly as you have suggested. But Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate, do not neglect a single detail of what you have said. Imagine the absolute soul-crushing horror on Haman's face. Instead of hanging his arch-nemesis, the most powerful man in the empire is forced to become Mordecai's personal parade attendant. Haman has to personally dress the man he hates most in royal robes, lead his horse through the blazing hot streets of Susa, and scream at the top of his lungs how awesome Mordecai is. It is an excruciating, devastating public humiliation. When the parade finally ends, Mordecai quietly goes right back to his post at the gate, unaffected. But Haman runs home, covering his head in deep grief and terror. He tells his wife and friends what just happened. Even they realise the tide has irreversibly turned. His wife chillingly predicts, "Since Mordecai is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." Before Haman can even process this horrifying prophecy, the king's eunuchs arrive at his door. There is no time to mourn. It is time for Queen Esther's second banquet. And Haman is about to be the main course. Haman is practically dragged from his house by the royal eunuchs, his mind still spinning from the crushing humiliation of parading Mordecai through the city. There is no time to strategize, no time to recover his shattered ego. He is ushered straight into the opulent, dimly lit private quarters of Queen Esther for the highly anticipated second banquet. The atmosphere in the room is suffocatingly tense. On the surface, it's a luxurious feast. Gold goblets, exotic fruits, and the finest vintage wines. King Xerxes is relaxed, wineglass in hand, completely oblivious to the geopolitical earthquake about to happen. Haman is sweating, desperately trying to maintain his composure and figure out why he is really here. And Queen Esther. She is sitting there with lethal, icy calm. She holds all the cards, and she's finally ready to play her royal flush. For the third time, King Xerxes leans in and asks the million-dollar question. "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." The clinking of glasses stops. The room goes dead silent. Esther looks at the most powerful man in the world, takes a breath, and finally drops the ultimate bombshell. She doesn't ask for a new palace or a province or more jewellery. "If I have found favour with you, Your Majesty, and if it pleases you," she begins, her voice steady but trembling with emotion, "grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request." Let that sink in. The absolute monarch of the Persian Empire is suddenly being told that his favourite wife, the woman he chose out of thousands, is begging for her very survival. But Esther doesn't stop there. She brilliantly drives the knife deeper, laying out the horrifying reality of the situation without immediately naming names. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. It is a masterclass in rhetoric. She appeals to his economic sensibilities while simultaneously exposing a massive, illegal plot right under his nose. Xerxes is utterly, completely blindsided. A king whose entire reign is built on projecting absolute security and dominance suddenly finds out that someone has put a hit out on his queen. His confusion rapidly boils over into pure, unadulterated, imperial rage. He demands, his voice echoing off the marble walls, "Who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther doesn't blink. She doesn't look away. She turns and points a single, condemning finger directly across the table. An adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. The blood instantly drains from Haman's face. The text explicitly tells us he was terrified before the king and queen. And he should be. In a matter of seconds, the Prime Minister of the Empire has been unmasked as the architect of a plot to murder the Queen. But here is where the psychological brilliance of the scene peaks. Xerxes doesn't immediately order Haman's death. Instead, he slams his wine down, leaps up from the banquet table, and storms out into the palace garden. Why the garden? Because Xerxes is violently trapped in a political nightmare of his own making. In a flash, he realises that he is the one who gave Haman the signet ring. He authorised the decree. The law of the Medes and Persians states that a royal edict cannot be revoked. Xerxes is furious at Haman for deceiving him, but he is also furiously pacing the garden, trying to figure out how to navigate the fact that his own careless signature is legally binding him to murder his wife. Back in the banquet hall, Haman knows he is a dead man walking. In the brutal protocol of the Persian court, when the king leaves the room in a rage, your fate is sealed. Panicked, sobbing, and completely stripped of his arrogant pride, Haman throws himself at Esther, begging for his life. In his frantic desperation, he trips and falls onto the couch where Queen Esther is reclining. Just at that exact, terrifyingly precise microsecond, King Xerxes strides back into the room from the garden. Xerxes looks at his prime minister, the man who manipulated him, the man who ordered the death of his queen, now sprawled across his wife's private couch. Now, whether Xerxes genuinely believed Haman was making a physical move, or whether he just realised this was the perfect, legally justifiable excuse to execute him on the spot without having to explain the messy genocide loophole, the king roars, "Will he even assault the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as those words leave the king's mouth, it is over. The royal guards instantly rush in and throw a cloth over Haman's face. In the ancient world, covering a condemned man's face meant he was no longer worthy to see the light of day or look upon the king. Then comes the final cinematic stroke of poetic justice. One of the king's eunuchs, a man named Harbona, casually chimes in with impeccable comedic timing. "You know, Your Majesty, there happens to be a massive 75-foot gallows standing right next to Haman's house. He just built it this morning for Mordecai, the man who spoke up and saved the king's life." Xerxes doesn't skip a beat. The irony is too perfect, the solution too clean. "Impale him on it!" the king shouts. So they take Haman, the grand architect of violence, the man whose fragile ego demanded a towering monument of death, and they hang him high in the Susa sky on the very same gallows he had constructed for his enemy just hours before. The villain's trap becomes his own tomb. The scene closes with one chilling, definitive sentence that wraps up the climax of the book. Then the king's fury subsided. Haman might be swinging from a 75-foot gallows, But the story isn't over. In fact, the biggest geopolitical crisis is still looming over the empire. The villain is dead, but his terrifying decree is very much alive. Remember, according to the inflexible constitutional laws of the Medes and Persians, any edict sealed with the king's signet ring can never be revoked or erased. Not even the king himself can hit the undo button. So, legally speaking, the empire-wide state-sponsored purge is still officially scheduled for the 13th day of the 12th month. The ticking time bomb hasn't been disarmed. It has just lost its bomb maker. That same day, King Xerxes gives Haman's vast confiscated estate to Queen Esther. Esther then finally reveals to the king exactly who Mordecai is to her, that the man who saved the king's life is actually her adoptive father. Realizing the immense loyalty of this family, Xerxes takes off his royal signet ring, the exact same ring he had carelessly tossed to Haman months ago, and hands it directly to Mordecai. In a single afternoon, the stubbornly defiant Jewish exile is elevated to the position of Prime Minister of the mighty Persian Empire. But Esther knows that a promotion and a fancy estate aren't enough to stop an army. She falls at the king's feet, weeping bitterly, and begs him to put an end to the impending genocide. Xerxes looks at Mordecai and essentially says, "My hands are legally tied. I cannot cancel the original order. But you have the ring now. Write a new royal decree in my name, however you see fit, to counter it." Mordecai immediately goes to work and drafts the ultimate legal loophole. If he cannot legally force the attackers to stand down, he will make the victims untouchable. The new royal edict grants the Jewish people across all 127 provinces the explicit, legal right to assemble, to arm themselves, and to fiercely defend their lives and property against any armed force that tries to attack them. The king's scribes are summoned. The massive decree is furiously translated into every language of the empire, and couriers sprint out on the king's fastest royal horses. When the new edict hits the streets of Susa, the atmosphere completely flips. The wailing and sackcloth are gone. The text says that for the Jews it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honour. Finally, the dreaded date arrives. The 13th of Adar. The exact day Haman's dice had selected for total annihilation. But when the sun rises, the tables are completely turned. Because Mordecai is now the second most powerful man in the world, the provincial governors, nobles, and military commanders across the empire aren't going to risk their careers or their lives by siding with a dead villain's followers. Instead, they throw their full political and military support behind the Jews. What was supposed to be a tragic massacre becomes a stunning, decisive victory. The Jewish people defend themselves successfully, neutralizing the violent factions that hated them. To cement the total collapse of Haman's toxic legacy, his 10 sons are also defeated. The existential threat is completely eradicated. To ensure this incredible reversal of fate is never forgotten, Mordecai sends letters to all the Jews, establishing a brand new annual national holiday. They named it Purim. The name is a brilliant stroke of dark irony. Pur is the ancient word for the dice that Haman rolled to randomly select the day of their destruction. The festival takes the very symbol of Haman's dark superstition and reclaims it as a permanent symbol of survival. The date that was supposed to mark the tragic end of their history is permanently transformed into a massive celebration of life, filled with feasting, sending plates of food to neighbours, and giving generous gifts to the poor. So we arrive back at the mystery we started with, the grand, glaring omission, the ultimate hidden Easter egg of ancient literature. Why is God's name completely missing from the Book of Esther? After watching this entire epic geopolitical thriller unfold, the answer becomes brilliantly, remarkably clear. The author didn't forget to mention God. The author deliberately erased his name to make a profound, timeless point. Think about the absolute absurdity of the coincidences in this story. What are the odds that out of an entire, massive empire, a marginalised, orphaned refugee girl is chosen as the queen? What are the odds that her uncle just happens to sit by the gate and overhear an assassination plot? What are the odds that the king suffers from a random bout of insomnia on the exact night before Haman plans to execute Mordecai? What are the odds that the king asks for the royal chronicles and the servant happens to flip to the exact obscure page detailing Mordecai's forgotten heroism? And what are the odds that Haman walks into the courtyard at that precise microsecond, only to end up tripping onto the queen's couch at the exact moment the king walks back into the room? None of this is luck. None of this is a random roll of the dice. The Book of Esther is a literary masterpiece designed to show us the invisible hand. It teaches a philosophical truth that is arguably more relatable than any story of seas splitting in half or fire falling from the sky. The message is this: just because there are no blinding miracles doesn't mean there is no mastermind. Just because you cannot see the director doesn't mean the play isn't perfectly scripted. When God seems completely absent, he is often doing his most intricate, behind-the-scenes work. And this is where the story of a Persian beauty pageant and an ancient political rivalry reaches right out of the screen and grabs us by the collar today. Most of us do not live in a world of burning bushes, booming voices from the heavens, or obvious supernatural interventions. We live in a world that looks a lot like Esther's. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's filled with corrupt leaders, massive egos, fragile politicians, toxic work environments, and sudden, terrifying crises. We often look at the news or our own difficult lives and wonder, where on earth is God in all of this? Is anyone actually steering the ship? Esther's story screams across the centuries with a resounding yes, but it also demands something from you. It leaves you with the ultimate question, the same terrifying, empowering question Mordecai asked a frightened young woman thousands of years ago. Look at your life right now. Look at the seemingly random circumstances that brought you to your current city, your current job, your current school, or your current circle of friends. What if it isn't an accident? What if your presence in that messy, challenging situation is not a stroke of bad luck, but a strategic placement? When the dark moments come, when justice seems completely inverted and the odds are entirely stacked against you, you have a choice. You can hide. You can stay silent and hope someone else fixes the problem. Or you can stand up. You can risk your comfort, your reputation, or even your life to do what is right. Because who knows, the universe just might have placed you right where you are, with the unique voice and the specific platform you have for such a time as this.